Okay, before we get started, can we just verify that everyone's hearing us okay? Can you?
Yeah. Let's see if we got some audio going. Um, Looks like audio is coming through the OBS studio.
Okay,
Good.
we got a verification.
Hopefully the settings should still be the same from last night.
Okay, how?
Morning, everybody. Or afternoon, depending on where you are, but it's morning here.
So, this is day 2 of what we are calling Oonmoot. And today we have set aside some more technical matters. You might have noticed yesterday that we glossed over some minor disagreements Brett and I have. And we also didn't talk much about notation at all. You know, if you were writing for these instruments, how do you actually do that? So today we're going to talk about some of that in a good-natured discussion. I'm not sure I'd call it a debate.
Not really a debate. No, Richard and I have been discussing this on and off for probably years now, I guess. And we have slightly differing opinions on, one, what to call the instruments, and two, how to notate them as best for both the composer and for the player. And I think that...
Now, but I think what's most important to stress is that our goals are the same. We don't want to go different places. We just have slightly different ideas on how to get there.
Right.
And I think we also... Our opinions tend to be a cluster of opinions in contrast to other opinions that we would both much prefer not.
Yeah, there are definitely some absolute no's, but...
Yeah, so let's get started with nomenclature. So you might have noticed on all of our overlays yesterday, let's see if I can pull one up. So for the bassoon, everything's fine, contrabassoon. But then all of a sudden, when we get to the tenor oon, I've listed two terms, both tenor oon and tenor bassoon. Now, so our differences of opinion are mainly are entirely going to affect the smaller bassoons. So Brett and I both agree that when you're talking about bassoon sizes, if the size of bassoon ends in bass, that just allides together. It's not bass bassoon, it's bassoon. It's not contrabass bassoon, it's contrabassoon. It's not great bass bassoon, it's great bassoon. It just seems sensible.
Right, absolutely.
The minor disagreement comes when you're talking about the little instruments, which the size doesn't end in bass. So, for example, this instrument here that I would call the tenor oon. The problem is, or the inconsistency is, well, there's not an instrument called the oon. Right? Oon is just a whimsical shorthand for bassoon, I guess.
Right, and the actual term bassoon, if you were to separate it out into its two roots, it's bass and soon. So soon is derived from son, the French, and it means sound. So if we were to really do it logically, it would be the tenor soon.
But I think Brett knows this about me. I'm less concerned with what's logical, and more concerned with what's usable. Now, my primary argument in favor of tenor-oon, altoon, sopranoon is not logical. It's preference. I like the term tenor-oon. I think it's neat that when, as you know, all the other instruments have these, you know, 2 words. The bassoon gets these nice little concise compound names. Now, I can make a logical argument in favor of that by pointing out that really the only 2 in modern American English, which, you know, Brett and I are both modern-ish Americans, the only 2 bassoon family instruments that are remotely common are the bassoon and the contrabassoon. So, to me, if you were to take those 2 instruments as canon, you're not going to change those 2 names, and try to extrapolate that out, to me, the most sensible way, or the straightest line between those 2 points, is to say that the name of a bassoon family instrument is the size followed by oon. Bassoon, contrabassoon, tenor oon. Now, obviously, that's not a there's not really any etymology there. It's all based on, you know, common usage today, and it's all designed with the whole argument is designed with an end goal of getting to, I like the name tenor-oon, and I like to use it.
So I don't actually have a problem with tenor-oon. It's once you get to the smaller sizes when it starts becoming problematic. So I basically have 2 very straightforward rules on the nomenclature. 1, the name of the instrument family needs to be present. In this case, it is the bassoon family. So in our cases, we've got the bassoon and the contrabassoon. The name of the family is present. Great bassoon, the name of the family is present. Therefore, logically, if we extrapolate that, it should be tenor bassoon. And that gives us the full family name. We don't have to go asking ourselves, if we've never seen the term tenor-oon before, what is a tenor-oon? Well, it's a tenor bassoon. Same with alto bassoon. Calling it an altoon, I mean, that just sounds like a made-up word.
All
words are made up.
Yeah. Now, in my defense, there is precedence for that with the piccolo. The piccolo as part of the flute family.
Right. We drop the name
flute.
Flute, right. However, they don't do that in other languages. It's kleine Flaute, petite flute. So that is really the only case where that happens. And now that's the first rule. The second rule is that if any word is repeated, that repeated word gets elided. So that
in altoon, since the 2 is repeated.
No,
it's not a word. I had to stretch that a bit.
Yeah, so I wouldn't call it great bass bassoon because there's 2 basses in there. We don't call it contrabass bassoon. We just call it contrabassoon.
And maybe all of this confusion would have been prevented if we had called it the contrabass bassoon. Then you could argue that bassoon is just a shorthand for bass bassoon, in the same way that no one calls a B-flat clarinet a B-flat soprano clarinet. It's just clarinet.
You do see that in some band rooms, though. You will see people call it B-flat soprano clarinet.
So not nobody, but...
Right.
It's understood that clarinet by itself.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But for whatever complicated... linguistic reason, borrowing from between 3 different languages, contrabassoon entered English as contrabassoon, not contrabass bassoon. And personally, I don't like contra bassoon as two words. I don't think that makes much sense.
It doesn't make much sense, no. The other linguistic alternative for contrabassoon in English is, of course, double bassoon. And you actually see that most often in English works. Look at the planets.
Yeah.
And the part of the planets is called double bassoon.
Now, and I'm not a big fan of double bassoon either, but specifically for these purposes, double bassoon is really hard to extrapolate that into the rest of the family. Because then you have, 3/4 bassoon, and then half bassoon, and then 3/8 bassoon.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And then you're just going to get fractionally smaller and smaller bassoons.
And
it will never go away.
Yeah. So, we both think that the term for this instrument should include tenor and should end in un.
Whether or not it has the bass in there. Now, I think for colloquial, everyday talking about between and amongst bassoonists, I think calling it a tenorune is perfectly fine. However, when I go to set down what I'm going to call it on paper, if I'm going to be doing some more academic writing, if I'm going to put it in one of my own compositions, I'm absolutely going to call it a tenor bassoon. Just to be, it's a little bit more formal name. It's probably what should appear at the top of the page.
And for now, while there's still ambiguity, I'm going to just call it tenorune. Now, I'm not much of a composer, though. So I do some arranging, and if I arrange something with a tenorune part, I'm just going to write tenorune. But, importantly, I'm not so adamant about it that if 20 years from now, these instruments are common and the consensus came around to just calling it a tenor bassoon, then I'm not going to be the guy going around at the convention saying, it's not a tenor bassoon, it's a tenorune. I'm perfectly willing to follow consensus once the consensus is there. But until the consensus is there, I'm going to advocate for the whimsical tenorune.
So I think there is a precedence in this, in the string section, in the cello. We always call it just the cello, but its full name is, of course, violoncello. And typically in printed part, particularly for orchestra music, you're going to see violoncello at the top of the page.
Yeah.
You're going to call it a cello, but its name is violoncello.
Now, is there anything else you want to... So the tenorune and the altoon and the sopranune, it's really the same...
Right.
The same thing. I like to cram it all together because it makes a funnier looking... a more archaic looking word to me.
Yeah, so it is funnier. Once you get to alto, it becomes less clear, I think.
Well, and it's also, you're at the point where it's not yet really been the altoon, as little as the tenorune has been used in professional situations, the altoon really hasn't at all. So, and it's not even clear that a fully professional altoon that was designed for professionals with a distinctive timbre and a reed designed for the instrument rather than one designed to use bassoon reeds for teaching purposes, it's not even clear that would fill an
ecological niche,
a needed role in the orchestra or band. So the whole thing on an altoon and sopranune, it's not a huge deal.
It's not, no. With the nomenclature on this, I think we should say that the manufacturers call this an octave bassoon. However, that is an ambiguous term because this is also an octave bassoon. It's just an octave in the other direction.
Yeah, it's the same problem as yesterday we talked about the old terms quint bassoon and quart bassoon and how they were confusingly used both for tenorunes and what we might now call a great bassoon.
So yeah, octave bassoon, while you will see it often, does have the inherent problem of, just it's ambiguous. And then you will also see this instrument referred to as a fagottino, which I think Richard and I are in agreement. We should not be calling that in English.
Yeah,
it borders
it's not a term that... It's a term designed to cause confusion. Well, not designed. Sorry, that was the wrong word. In English, it's destined to cause confusion.
Absolutely.
And it's also ambiguous because it's a term used for...
any size of bassoon smaller than the bassoon.
And, if you're Italian, it makes more sense. But, even my Tenorune case... It is marked with that title, so it's ambiguous in that regard.
Yeah.
Now, so one place we do have big disagreements is on this very serious instrument here.
Absolutely serious. Absolutely serious.
So this is the instrument yesterday that I called the piccoloon. That Brett indicated that he would prefer to call the sopranino bassoon. And for just a little bit, we're going to entertain the notion that this is a remotely viable instrument. It's not. So my argument... Well, actually...
just if we go logically, bass, tenor, alto, soprano, the next step up is sopranino. But that raises the question of, if there's a sopranino, where's the piccolo? And I can see your argument of saying, this is the piccolo.
It's right here.
And see, there's the problem. He reaches over and said, here it is.
But, importantly, this thing is too small to play. So what's the purpose of saving a word for an instrument that's not... If this one isn't viable, this one isn't possible. The purple one exceeds the capabilities of what a reed can do. Or fingers.
Well, yes. I mean, we can genetically engineer humans to be smaller.
Yeah, see, this is the problem.
Yes.
Because we just had a perfectly logical comment about the etymology of the bassoon family.
And
Otto stricken from chat because it used the German term for bassoon, which in English is liable to cause confusion.
Right.
Okay, so I get what you're saying about logically soprano, sopranino, piccolo. However, typically in instrument families, you do skip names if it doesn't serve a purpose. Now,
you'll see the baritone is the one that's skipped most often.
Or in a lot of cases, tenor.
Tenor, yeah.
So my argument would be, Brett likes to have the piccolo an octave above the soprano. My argument is that it's more important for the piccolo to be some number of octaves above the bass or the primary instrument. So to me, it makes more sense to have a piccolo that's 2 octaves above the bassoon than to have a piccolo that's 2.5 octaves above the bassoon, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But anyway,
it's a moot point, I think, though,
because
it's not a viable instrument.
Exactly. But
surprisingly, though, I think the soprano bassoon is viable. As much to your chagrin, it came out way better than it has any right to come out.
Yeah. Now, honestly, the whole reason we talked about this is just to make the subcontra bassoon seem more reasonable. Okay. So, have we talked enough about the piccoloon?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that is more than enough talk. that has ever been said or should ever be said about the piccoloon.
So,
I will concede piccoloon. I will concede piccoloon.
Because you don't care.
Yes.
Okay, so it's probably time to move on from nomenclature because, we're not going to arrive at a definitive answer, and, we're probably not going to change each other's minds. That's not the purpose of today.
No.
It's about discussing some things, and maybe eventually consensus will arise. So let's move on to what's probably the more interesting conundrum, which is...
Notation.
Notation. So, real quick, let's go back to something we were talking about yesterday about the bassoon, because I think it's important to stress before we get into notation, and that is the key the bassoon is built in versus the key that the instrument is written in.
Right. So, on all woodwind instruments, all modern woodwind instruments, we name the fundamental pitch as being the 7-finger note. There are some flute players who will disagree with this, but by and large, all your modern woodwinds are named for their 7-finger note.
If you want to be really pedantic and please everybody, even piccolo players, you could say that the fundamental note of a woodwind is the note one whole step below the 6-finger note. That covers everything. Piccolo doesn't have a low C key, so sometimes flute players get defensive.
Old system flutes pre-Berm were named for their 6-finger note, and there are still a few players who abide by the traditional flute nomenclature system of the 6-finger note. So a modern flute, what we call a C flute, a traditional flute player would call a D flute.
Yeah, but if you use that nomenclature outside of a very niche and mostly historical focused group, you're just going to cause endless confusion.
Or you'll see it a lot in British and Irish folk music today still.
Okay.
But we've got our bassoon here, and so the 7-finger note, and by 7-finger we mean, of course, the whole step below 6-finger. There are 3 keys for the right pinky.
But one
of them are chromatic, one is diatonic. And that is going to be F2.
Now, if the bassoon were notated... Now, let's phrase it differently. We could imagine an alternate universe where the bassoon were notated just like a member of the oboe family,
right,
or a member of the sax family, or a member of the modern flute family. And if that were the case, the notation would look something like this. So instead of, so that 7-finger note would be written as C, just below treble clef.
Right.
And it would sound a perfect 12th lower than written. In other words, this is like an octave lower English horn with a chromatic downward extension, because we have an extension down to low F, and then we continue through the ledger lines all the way up to a very high C.
High C, and that would be the high F on the bassoon.
Yeah. Not exactly a friendly note for bassoons, but we have to play it sometimes. But that's not what we do. On bassoon, the bassoon is written in concert pitch, even though it's built in F. So that leads... Well, real quick, let's cover the octave instruments. So there's really I don't think there's any real debate on how the octave instrument should be notated. The contrabassoon is the same general thing as a bassoon. It's built in F. The 7-finger note is F. It's written in concert pitch. So just write it the same way, and then you don't have to worry about it. But Now, if you wanted, you can use, so you might notice that in my contrabassoon music or fingering charts or graphics, I usually use a bass clef with a little 8 below it. That's just a reminder of that assumed octave transposition. Whether or not you use normal bass clef or octave bass clef, players are going to play it exactly the same.
Right, and the 8 below the bass clef is decidedly a non-standard notation, though it is perfectly acceptable. You just won't see it as often.
Yeah. I just like it because I like to avoid transposition. Like, I don't find it difficult, I just don't like it.
Says the person who plays instruments that are just an octave apart and has never had to deal with clarinets or saxophones.
Well, I mean, I am one of the few people. When I learned saxophone for high school jazz band, all I had was a tuner. So I learned it in concert pitch. My first year of jazz band, I was reading second alto sax parts using clef transposition.
I still read my Barry sax music that way.
Yeah.
And I to this day have issues with saxophone key signatures because I am reading it in concert pitch. I know what the concert pitch is before I know what the written pitch on the page is. And that is a problem, I think.
So for sorry, let me get back over there. For contrabassoon, alto bassoon, altoon, subcontrabassoon, or hypothetically this thing, there's really no debate. It should just be written just like bassoon, sounding some number of octaves above or below what's written. The difficulty comes when we have instruments that are built in that halfway point. Do you want to grab your bassoon again?
Yeah.
So we're going to play a scale.
Okay.
Just from the 7-finger note up.
Hard or soft scale?
Just hard.
Okay.
So we're no longer an octave apart. So we have a conundrum. The basic question is this. Is the bassoon written in C, or let me rephrase that. Is the bassoon family written in a key a fifth higher? Yes. Is the bassoon family written in a key a fifth higher than the key it's built in? Is that why the bassoon is in C? Because C is a fifth above F and it's built in F, so it's written in C. Which would mean that this instrument, which is built in C, would need to be notated in G. Or is the bassoon family notated in concert pitch despite the key it's built in? Now, and there's precedent for that on other bass clef instruments. So tubas are always notated in C no matter what key they're built in. It's not, you would never try to argue that, since a B-flat tuba is written in C, then a C tuba needs to be written in D. That's crazy talk.
You will see some exceptions to this. In some European wind band traditions, most notably is the British brass band system, where they use treble clef for everybody, and your E flat and B flat tubas are both written in treble clef. You also have the French system, where the B flat tubas are written so they sound a ninth lower than written, but are in bass clef.
Yeah, sorry, trying to think ahead to pull up that graphic. So, and that's the, so finding the notation that works the best for players, that gives players the most makes it as easy as possible to pick up the instrument, as well as to use the instrument in a variety of situations is the goal. And that's something we both agree on.
Yes.
So let's pull up, so this graphic here shows off the basic scales of the kind of the four instruments we'll be looking at the most when it comes to notation. So tenorune, bassoon, great bassoon, and contrabassoon. So you can see that the tenorune and great bassoon are, and this is all concert pitch, are C. And then the bassoon so the kind of the most common and the most familiar to the most comfortable for modern woodwind players is what Brett's preference would be, which is where you just notate. Hold on a second. Let me. Okay.
That's a little better.
Yeah, would be if you just take all of those basic scales and notate them exactly the same. So when Brett plays a low F, if I were to play my low, my 7-finger note on tenorune, it would be written as a low F, the same as. So I'd be using the exactly same fingering and notation as on bassoon. And obviously there's a lot of advantages there.
You don't have to relearn your fingerings. You don't have to rethink the music that way.
Now, as someone who plays a lot of recorder and crumhorn, that's a little more the thought of having two different fingering systems is a little more comfortable to me. But I agree that is a prohibitive hurdle for most purposes.
Right. You'd probably be in the minority on that group, being able to switch back and forth between F and C fingerings.
But there's an important cheat that I think moves things into so that concert pitch is just a little bit better overall. The downside of transposed notation is that you're essentially reliant upon parts written specifically in that transposition, which for an instrument that's very uncommon is quite limiting. It means that you might have to renotate anything that you want to play. It also means that if you need to, because these instruments are so rare, if you need to take a tenorune part and play it on bassoon, which is something that's very likely to happen, if
for whatever reason you are crazy enough to write a tenorune part, and you don't have a tenorune player, it's going to inevitably be played on bassoon, or your piece just isn't going to get played.
So Brendan, you asked about notation for young players. We're talking about for adults here. Obviously, for young players, you would absolutely use transposed notation because the whole point is preparing students to learn bassoon. So you want everything to be as similar as possible. Same reed, same notation. But for adults, I think that there's a trick that we can split the difference. Now, it just so happens that these families of instruments, the great bassoon is a fifth above the contrabassoon. The C tenorune, not the B flat tenorune, the C tenorune is a fifth above the bassoon. Now, we could use a different clef to represent that so that bassoonists could see the same staff positions, associate those with the staff positions from bassoon, but still be reading in concert pitch. And it just so happens there not only is there such a clef, But that clef is one that's professional bassoonists are already fluent in, and that is not showing. Okay, tenor clef. So right here, I've taken this same basic scale and I've notated it in what I would consider modified concert notation, which is putting tenorune and, well, I'm primarily talking about tenorune because I own a tenorune. I consider great bassoon Brett's thing. Like, Brett and I have probably equal argument to be authoritative on tenorune. We have both owned tenorunes.
Yes.
But Brett is definitely the voice of authority on great bassoon. So any suggestions I might make are just that. Brett is the final arbiter on great bassoon. So here, when I play the lowest or the 7-finger pitch on the tenorune, looking at it in tenor clef, I can associate that with the same staff positions as on bassoon. So you can see that all 4 of these notations have the same staff positions going up the scale. It's written in tenor clef, but I can imagine a bass clef. And the only thing I have to do is the F sharps. I just have to mentally
make sure your F sharps, written F sharps, are played as B naturals.
Yeah, that if I see an F sharp, I'm playing it as B natural, or that if I see what looks like a B sharp, I'm playing it as a B natural, depending on how you think of it. But this is something bassoonists do not infrequently. I mean, I don't know about you, but I pretty regularly had to play bass clarinet parts or tenor sax parts, and I would do the same thing. I would read it as tenor clef and adjust the key signature. Or even more common was like bari sax or great bass clarinet parts, which are in E flat. You imagine, you pretend that treble clef is a bass clef instead. You adjust the key signature, and then you can play it just fine. So this is my argument for notation, which would be these instruments that are in C, are built in C, to put them in tenor clef by default, concert pitch, and that way the players are reading concert pitch, and it makes more music accessible for the player. It also makes that part accessible for bassoonists. Sure, you'll get some bassoonists whining about, I had to read a low F in tenor clef, but play enough second bassoon Tchaikovsky, and you're already playing those notes in tenor clef.
The downside to that notation, however, is if you get into the upper register where tenor clef would be the appropriate choice. If you're playing up there, all bets are off, because this system no longer works unless you switch over to mezzo-soprano clef, which is your alternate clef.
Which, as much as I like that idea, I don't think it's viable because, well, first of all, I mean, conductors already, or I shouldn't say conductors, directors already complain about having to read tenor and alto clef.
Yeah.
Mezzo-soprano clef would be a non-starter. But more importantly for me is I don't think it's a good idea to alternate, to have one instrument have to alternate between 2 different C clefs. Trombones have to be able to play alto or tenor clef, but I'm sure there's an exception out there.
I'm sure there is too, but I've never seen it.
But you generally don't have a part that goes from alto to tenor clef, even for trombone.
Right.
And I think having to switch between different C clefs would be a disaster waiting to happen. My argument would be either, because especially on tenorune, those notes are going to be quite rare. Either you could just use the ledger lines all the way up. That highest note I played was a G5, which, if written in tenor clef ledger lines, would just look like a high C on for bassoon. It'd be like a high C above bass clef.
Right. Yeah.
Is on the same staff position as a high G above tenor clef. And bassoonists, we don't really love reading high Cs in bass clef, but it happens.
It happens. Yeah, we've seen it before.
And the other suggestion I might make is those notes are rare enough that you could honestly just use treble clef.
Yeah.
Concert pitch. If you had a part that used that register a lot. But I agree that is a difficulty in this position. Now, these notations aren't really that incompatible because realistically you're going to have to prepare alternate parts anyway.
Yeah.
Because of this instrument over here that you can't see. Okay. There you go.
All right. So this is the F/B flat tenor bassoon. And arguably, this is more useful as a pedagogical tool.
Yeah, it's closer to the size of a bassoon, so it works better with bassoon reeds. And it's also voiced more similarly to bassoon. But that same advantage and like we talked about earlier, for pedagogical purposes, it really does need to be transposed notation.
Yeah, it really does. And the fundamental scale of this instrument is B flat, which, you see in clarinets and saxophones all the time, but it's weird in a double reed family.
And unfortunately, there's not a really convenient clef that puts B flat just below the staff.
Yeah.
So that we don't have that tenor clef trick that I was able to use to read this instrument in concert pitch. So right now, neither of these instruments are common, and you're not really going to know which you're gonna get, or if you're gonna get either of them. Which means two possibilities. Either you're gonna have to prepare 3 separate parts, one transposed in F for the B flat tenorune, one transposed in G for the C tenorune, and a bass clef concert pitch part for bassoon. However, I think that there's a middle ground, which is that as a composer, you could prepare 2 parts. A part transposed in F for the B flat tenorune, and a part in my notation that could be played either on C tenorune or bassoon.
Right. Or I think we just, come to the consensus that if we are writing for a professional part, I think it should only be for the G instrument, the C instrument. Well, and this one should be relegated to a pedagogical tool.
I don't know that I'd use the term relegated. I mean, it's a valuable... The fact that it's more effective for pedagogy is valuable in its own right.
Absolutely.
It's not a shorthand, but I do agree for many reasons, and the instrument that's a fifth higher, the tenorune in C, has more potential for professional use. Not only because of with tenor clef trick.
But you've also got a higher range.
Yeah, and that's mainly what you're looking for. With a small bassoon. Not really that you're going to expand the range that much, because even that high G is playable on bassoon. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's easier to articulate on this instrument, but you're going to have some of those notes that are terribly awkward on bassoon are going to be a little bit more accessible on tenorune. But you don't
Brendan
really
wants to hear the La Sacra.
Oh, yeah, I don't know my fingerings well enough yet. Yeah. I just got this instrument about a week ago, and On a bassoon reed, the upper register fingerings are intended to be the same. I personally found that they're maybe close enough for pedagogical purposes, but not close enough for...
Once you get up to really about written D above the staff, above the bass clef.
Yeah, the fingerings become differently. Fingerings become differently. Wow, that's... yeah. So it's going to be a little while before I can play some of those upper register notes fluently on tenoring, because I still have a lot of long tone work and a lot of fingering experimentation to work on. But is there anything that we didn't cover? Oh. So the great
bassoon.
Yeah.
Let's grab the great.
The great bassoon is also built in C, which, if we notate it as a transposing instrument, would mean that it needs to be notated in G. Sorry, that's the wrong one. So here, what note is it set up for?
It's set up... Well, I can play an open F.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really, really flat with that reed.
Yeah, so Brett was at somewhat of a disadvantage because I got to put together my subcontrabassoon two days ago and then go to bed. Brett got to take apart his great bassoon, load it in a car, and drive 5 hours through the southern summer. So yesterday, with
minimally working air conditioning.
So yesterday, he was having some leaks that were preventing the instrument from working. But I think we got some of those fixed.
So I've got all but a couple of tone holes on here plugged up. So this note here, that's a sounding C3. It would be fingered as open F on the bassoon. And then I've also got, that's going to be G2. It's fingered as C3. And then this is the low B flat. Let's see if it will come out.
Oh, sorry. I promise that's not on purpose.
So the low B flat does not want to come out with this reed because this is a bassoon reed that's just been overly reamed out to bring it up to pitch. We got to work on reed design. And this is a shorter vocal than a bassoon vocal. But it is still, I think, too long. So let's see. This is a modified Baroque bassoon reed. So that would be what is effectively the written low B flat, sounding low F, but we're almost half a step flat with that reed.
Now, so if I had built the great bassoon, and if it were my decision to make, which, to be clear, I didn't, and it's not, my argument would be that you could do the same thing, which is treat the great bassoon as a concert pitch instrument, but notate it in tenor clef by default. It would just sound an octave lower in tenor clef. So that this way, not only would you be reading concert pitch, but if you needed to play the passage on contrabassoon, which, at least for the time being, is a reasonable possibility, it's easier to for the contrabassoonist to, just read that low tenor clef. Instead of seeing a a low F and having to play everything a perfect fifth higher.
Right. So absolutely viable. I think a great bassoonist is going to need to be versed in multiple forms of notation because but virtually no literature exists for it. If I were to show up to a band rehearsal, I'm not going to be handed a great bassoon part. I'm probably going to be handed a contra bassoon part, or string bass part, or a tuba part, and I'm going to have to be able to read those straight from bass clef.
Or if you're really unlucky, like a bass clarinet in a German notation.
Yeah, no. No. We'll get Steve Fox to build us a new bass clarinet in A.
So yeah, once again, we're not expecting to find a definitive answer. And
with this one, there definitely won't be. The player's going to have to be just versed in every style, I think.
Yeah, and that's probably realistically the most reasonable answer is that players are going to need to be able to read concert pitch to be able to play more than a handful of pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And composers are probably going to prefer the transposed notation. However, that does lock you into making a choice of C or B flat tenor, which causes some problems if a player has the other one.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's a conundrum with the two sizes of tenor, and I kind of almost wish that the makers had chosen one or the other.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there's potential for, and right now this is all unrealized potential because the B flat tenorune is quite uncommon, but almost exclusively used in pedagogy. At least in the United States, the C tenorune is much less uncommon.
However, I think it's more common over in Europe.
Yeah. Which is why it was so weird to find this in stock somewhere.
Yeah. I think that we can equate it to the B flat and C clarinet. The C clarinet would seem like a great pedagogical tool for younger students. However, because of its size, it becomes a more difficult instrument to play. Because it is that whole step smaller, and so it requires a firmer embouchure. Everything's just a little firmer, a little tighter, and it's harder for kids to play that.
Okay, let's see if we have any questions. So, is that Wilhelm? Willem, sorry. Mm-hmm. Why don't we just write everything in how it sounds and be done with it? That's kind of my argument. Like, it works out well for me because in this case there is a workaround, kind of like a trick to split the difference between transposition and concert pitch. I personally am not a big fan of transposition. I'd rather just, if you have a family with two sizes, or that have two series, so like 2 1/2 octave series, so you might have oboes in F and C, bassoons in F and C, flutes in C and G, saxes in B flat and E flat. I personally would prefer just to have two different fingering systems, and then everybody can play there's more flexibility. When I have played in recorder groups, that flexibility of just being able to say, this instrument this is a little low on soprano, I'm just going to grab my alto, and since everything's in concert pitch, you might have to make some octave allowances, but it's a lot easier, I find.
However, once you get into sizes that are outside of those, it becomes much more difficult. So when you're dealing with a B flat and an A clarinet, there's no workaround there.
Yeah, well, so the argument I would make there is that the B flat and the A clarinet is kind of it's a historical anachronism, right?
It is.
It made a lot of sense when it was done, and then a lot of music was written for B flat and A clarinet, so even modern players have B flat and A clarinet, so there's no reason not to use those instruments. But if you invented the clarinet today, I personally don't think you would invent a B flat and an A clarinet. You would choose one, and then have. Personally, I think Steve Fox once made the argument that the ideal clarinet is a C Bassett clarinet.
Yes.
Now, I think that there's also some potential drawbacks there, but just an instrument in C with a range to C3, you can cover
everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
And so that might be what we would build if we were building the clarinet today, but we're not. We are, however, in a position to shape the future of the bassoon family since it's so rudimentary. Mm-hmm. And I think there's more room to advocate for not perfect, but better. Or more logical, more consistent for modern purposes. Like, you don't need a bassoon in F and a bassoon in E and a bassoon in G.
No.
It would, if some crazy maker made them, it'd be fun to look at, but it would just be too much hassle to actually use.
Right.
You wouldn't show up at a gig, with 3 bassoons in very slightly different keys, because, well, I need a slightly different timbre here. You just use a different reed.
Yeah. We're not trumpet players. That said, it is a fun thought experiment. I know you would love to have a bassoon in G, a whole step higher than regular bassoon.
Well, yeah, but
just so you can play Marriage of Figaro.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't even tell people I was using it. I would try to keep it a secret from composers. You build like a little dummy extension up here, so it's the same length, and then it's just an instrument a whole step higher. You bring it to Marriage of Figaro. You play it in a perfectly reasonable key, and then you set it aside and never use it again.
Yeah.
But even that is...
And then you'll find some crazy composer who actually likes the instrument and says, oh, okay, this is now my first bassoon.
Yeah, so of the two of us, Brett and I have talked a little bit about lumpers versus splitters.
Yes, it's a kind of a taxonomical term. A lumper is someone who wants to group everything into the smallest category possible. A splitter splits it off into as many categories as possible.
Yeah, and those are the extremes. Of course, people who actually study taxonomy fall somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. So I think it would be fair to say that you're definitely slightly more of a splitter.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And I'm kind of an extreme lumper.
Yeah. I am taxonomically, always have been a splitter.
However, neither are you...
Except for brass instruments.
You are definitely not as much of a splitter as most brass players.
God, brass players are the most extreme splitters I have ever seen.
Yeah, it does make talking about brass instruments confusing because, these valves are in a slightly different arrangement. New instrument.
Yeah. It has a 1 degree angle difference. New instrument.
To be fair, a 1 degree taper angle difference is a pretty big difference.
Yeah.
Let me... so, another slight disagreement might be whether or not, the C tenorune versus the B flat tenorune would count as separate instruments. I'd be more inclined to just say that those both fall under the umbrella of tenorune, and in the same way that B flat trumpet and C trumpet, they're both trumpets. It's
right. No, you are correct there. Whether or not there's a timbral difference or a composition potential difference between the two is debatable.
Now, as far as timbre is concerned, my argument would be that any timbral difference that's inherent between the B flat and the C instruments is completely washed out by differences in reeds, differences in instruments, differences in players. Mm-hmm. So that it's at that point, you're getting into things composers typically don't concern themselves, right? Like, you don't write a part for my friend Marty on a 1987 LeBlanc clarinet, right? You write a part for clarinet.
I have met one composer who's done that before. He wrote for specific brands of instruments.
Yeah, and that's not reasonable.
That's extreme splitting for composers.
Yeah. Now, is it Shrish? Asked exactly the question you wanted someone to ask.
How should I consider composing for the Great Bassoon? Until it is a playable prototype, I wouldn't. I have, but only because I have the instrument here in my hands. I know what I think it's capable of, and I have a pretty good idea of its tonal capabilities, but I'm not 100% certain. I think, it will have a 4-octave range, but I don't know. Let's just see what I can do harmonic-wise. I wonder if I can get a written high G. So yeah, that would be a written high G. That's
Willem says, if composing for the Great Bassoon, please specify required ceiling height.
I mean, yeah. So this is 6 feet 8 inches tall. Let me see if I can convert that to meters for our people in the more civilized world.
Oh, yeah. What is it, like 2.1 meters? Something like that?
Yeah. 6.
I'm not good at doing the conversion in my head because I'm either working in millimeters, which is when I'm doing anything that's my choice, like any project I'm choosing to do, I'm doing in millimeters, or I'm working in inches, which is, like when I've done machine work in the past, and since I live in the US, you have to use inches. I don't do a lot of cross platform.
Yeah, so it's right at 2 meters tall.
Oh, okay.
But this is without the floor peg. If I were to be playing this with the floor peg on, and let's say, if I play it off to the side, it's not going to be too much taller than that. If I play it here in the center, it'll be...
Here, let's step back over here to the subcontra.
Okay. So, the Great Bassoon is slightly taller than the subcontra. To give you actually a better comparison, I'm going to raise it up here to compensate for the subcontra is sitting on a peg. Mm-hmm. So, this would be the same height because it's against the floor here. So yeah, you can see it is quite a bit taller.
However, compared to historical contrabassoons, they're both small.
Yes.
They're both short.
Right. So those Baroque contrabassoons are nearly another meter taller than this.
So I'm 6'4" and walking around with normal bassoons is angry face. So walking around with this and yeah. So the thing about the Great Bassoon is I believe it's designed to be disassembled like a normal bassoon.
Yeah. In fact, it's designed to be disassembled a little more compactly. So we got the bell here. So I will be getting a case for this, and I think I've settled in on a case that I can get a stock hard case that's 44 inches long, and that will fit the instrument in there perfectly. So, I mean, this is the longest joint here, the bass joint, and it's not terribly long. Once I've got everything taken apart, the one difference between the regular bassoon and the Great Bassoon is this comes apart in 2 pieces. And that just makes it a little easier to clean, a little easier to service.
Okay, whereas the subcontra bassoon, because of the complicated connections between the joints, I think it's only going to be able to be regularly disassembled into I think right now I'm planning on 3 or 4 pieces. So it's going to be the main body and then the bell assembly. So this top bend, this piece, and the bell itself might be 3 separate pieces for the case. But honestly...
Or multiple cases?
Well, yeah, multiple cases. It'll almost have to be multiple cases. Let's see. Okay, so I think the one last thing we wanted to talk about, kind of when we're in debate or discussion mode, is we're going to give a viability score to each of the instruments.
Let's say, availability 1 out of 100.
What? Wait, 100?
Oh, okay.
How about 10?
Okay, let's do it 1 out of 10. That's fine.
And so not necessarily availability, but viability. What its potential is. Yeah. If we imagine a world where all of these instruments could be purchased new, and players could use them easily, what has potential, what doesn't? Because one thing we don't want to do in our presentation of these 8 members of the Oons is pretend that they're all the same.
They aren't. No, and there is this inherent problem, and I've seen this with both my books and the old Bandistration blog, that the more I would write about these obscure instruments, the more people would say, oh, I can just write for this because it exists, and not know the very real aspect that these instruments are much rarer. They are harder to get players for. And
I've also seen the opposite, where players or composers and people who understand that these instruments are uncommon think that because you are writing about them or write for them that you don't know that you're ignorant for writing for these instruments.
I've seen that so often. And there is a catch-22 there. The people who have the weird and rare instruments are the ones that are going to jump at the chance to play them.
If they have the opportunity, because a lot of times they're not in those these ensembles that people are writing for. And we can get into that a little later. But I just want to speak to Brett's defense a little bit. The important thing to know about Brett is he knows his history. He's literally written the book on a lot of these instruments. So he understands which instruments are rare. He writes for obscure and uncommon instruments, not out of ignorance of that fact, but because that's what he wants.
I write for it in celebration of that fact, in fact.
Yeah, and you understand that there is a pragmatic payoff on the other end.
There's a reason that my large works are very difficult to perform.
So when he was talking before about he writes for the great bassoon, but he would also is encouraging other people to hold off. I think that holds true for a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have told people the exact same thing with the subcontra bassoon. It's that I'm really optimistic. I've thrown a lot of time, energy, and money into this instrument, but should you write for it now? You should probably wait. I mean, if you don't want to wait, then I'm happy to. I'm happy to listen and include another piece in the repertoire of the subcontra bassoon, but in your own interest, it might be better to wait.
A case in point, I have written for this instrument twice. Both my Symphonies 2 and 3 have parts for it. The part in Symphony 2 is optional. It is nice to have, but it is not 100% necessary. The part in Symphony 3 is not as optional, but I'm just building on, the experience from Symphony 2. I think it is going to be more viable.
And you understand that there is a trade-off there, and the logistics of getting a piece performed. And that's the important thing to realize. There's nothing wrong with writing for obscure instruments as long as you understand that there is a payoff. What I what I see sometimes from composers that are more excited about these new instruments, but maybe who don't have as much experience in these large ensembles, is they get almost angry and defensive that these orchestras are not out there hiring all of these obscure instruments to play their pieces.
Orchestras are in a position. Orchestras most of the time are going to operate in a position of economic distress.
Well,
maybe not distress, but
I think there's a more charitable interpretation, which is that if you're writing for a film, right? Someone is paying you money to compose for other people who are being paid money to play exactly what you write, which means you can do almost anything you want, right?
As long as they've got it in the budget, absolutely.
You write for 16 saxophones, then someone's in charge of hiring 16 saxophone players and flying them into LA to play that score. When you write for orchestra, though, you're writing for an ensemble. An orchestra is not a temp agency whose job it is to find the players necessary to play a certain piece. An orchestra is an ensemble of musicians that choose music that allows them to demonstrate their strengths. Pieces that use, a whole bunch of difficult to find obscure instruments that are not played by members of the orchestra are a hard sell, because you're essentially asking the orchestra to spend all of its budget on bringing in players that in not showcasing that ensemble's skill.
Yeah, and so it is difficult. Think about the fact that saxophones have not been added to the orchestra's roster. Saxophones have been around since the 1840s, and you still rarely see them used, despite there being thousands, tens of thousands of fantastic classical saxophone players out there who would jump at the chance to be included in orchestral literature.
Yeah, and the big challenge is, even though that there are plenty of players, and there are pieces written for saxophone, there's many more pieces that don't include saxophone. So an orchestra is placed in a situation where they have to decide, either they're going to audition a saxophone player to play, once a season, which is not a very fulfilling job for the saxophone player, right? Hey, come audition for this orchestra and you get to play one piece, and you might make $800 for the year. That's not a good deal for the saxophone player. But it's also stressful for the orchestra to have to rely on subs who, when you don't have that player as a regular member of your orchestra, you don't know if they're going to be available. They're not contracted to play with you. So you might program a piece with a really great alto sax solo and then end up a month beforehand and find out all of the players that you're comfortable with are busy elsewhere.
Yeah.
And then you have to rely upon a sub that you've never worked with before. And that's...
Subs for orchestras are stressful. I got called
in both directions.
Yeah, absolutely. No. An early orchestral gig I had, I got called into emergency sub. The second bassoon player either got ill or had a family emergency and couldn't make a sectional rehearsal. So I'm called at 4 to leave at 4:30 for a rehearsal at 7. So we have to drive, halfway across Texas or something, or like 2 counties over maybe, to go, and I have to sit there and sight read in a sectional, completely exposed, second bassoon part of the Brahms violin concerto.
Ugh.
Yeah. And I'm sitting there with the first bassoon set up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then it's Don Juan.
Yeah.
And then it's pictures at an exhibition.
I had a sub situation where I was asked like a day in advance to play an opera, and the music wasn't actually that hard, but it was an outdoor opera in the Arkansas summer, and my reeds were built for 68 to 72 degrees And at one point I had, the most polite horn player in the world kind of say, "Hey, you're a little bit sharp." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know. I'm trying. I really am. But I just don't have reeds for this."
My old contrabassoon teacher, Peter Grenier, said he got called to sub one time at the Dallas Opera because their contrabassoon player took ill. And it was the performance of Salome.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, no rehearsal. Just go in, sight read Salome on the performance.
So with all of those caveats out of the way about, let's get into these instruments.
Yeah, let's just start with bassoon.
Yep.
We'll start with most common.
We'll go in the same order that we did yesterday, because I have already made these overlays and have it keyed up, and I'm not going to change the order.
All right, so bassoon. Let's see, where is my bassoon?
I mean, almost by default, if we're going on a scale from 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, bassoon is a 10, right?
You know what? I wouldn't put it all the way to 10 because it is not universally available.
Yeah, but
it is universally expected, but it's not universally available.
But let's normalize it in as far as the bassoon family is concerned.
Yeah. So
bassoon, if we take whatever viability the bassoon has and set that as 10.
Right. Okay. In the real world, though, bassoon is not a 10 in and of itself.
Yeah.
In the bassoon world, it is.
Well, in orchestra, it definitely is. Like, I mean, if you don't have any bassoons in your orchestra, it's
you're not a top. You're not a.
Well,
you're not even.
You're not a functional orchestra.
You're upper. Yeah.
Maybe you're a pedagogical group. Maybe you're a
community.
And that might sound a little judgmental, and I'm sorry about that. But the bassoon is such an integral part of the orchestra.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a quarter of the woodwind section. I love, one of my favorite things when I'm teaching lessons is a student coming from their first youth orchestra rehearsal, and just the look on their face of, I was important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they're
I was heard.
They're not used to being 1/4 of the woodwind section.
Mm-hmm.
So bassoon is a 10.
Bassoon, yeah, we'll default to a 10. Then we go to contrabassoon.
And probably surprising no one, I would argue that contrabassoon is also a 10. It's expected in orchestras, it's expected that it's available. You won't always use it, but if you're writing a piece for orchestra, you assume that contrabassoon is an option unless you're, specifically going out of your way to write a smaller piece.
I would argue it's not a 10. If you're in anything other than a professional orchestra setting, so we're looking at bands, we're looking at community orchestras, I would say the contrabassoon drops to a 5. I would think we are in a contrabassoon renaissance right now where contrabassoons are becoming more and more common, but it is still not universally available in every situation.
Now, but then there's the other side of viability. So not just availability, but viability of it fills a very important role.
Oh yeah, it is 100% viable
in the orchestra. So I think that counteracts some of the available issues. Like, I mean, the reason the contrabassoon is used orchestrally, despite its that it's not always easy to find, is because it does things that were not that otherwise are not really possible.
Yeah.
Not just with the woodwinds, but the orchestra as a whole.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pitches that if you want something that lasts more than a second and a half and is a certain depth, you need a contrabassoon.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking about, when I say viability is a 10, I'm talking about potential and composition and all that stuff.
Right.
Obviously, there are availability concerns.
Yes.
I might be willing to go down to a 9 or 8.
Yeah.
In lieu of that. However, I do think we need to leave a little bit of floor room for the instruments that come next.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're going to be getting into some negative numbers.
Well, we can always go to fractions. That's why I was going to start at 100.
Well, we can just pretend it's a logarithmic scale.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so next, and I'm sorry, I have not been updating the little graphics.
Tenor?
The tenoroon. So, for me, there's a couple of issues with the tenoroon. Obviously, I'm less concerned. I'm conceiving of this more of a potential for the future.
I think that's how you have to look at it.
Because
say potential.
Yeah. There's a couple of issues with the tenoroon though. It doesn't actually provide you that much extra range above the bassoon.
Mm-hmm. It helps you reach some of those notes more comfortably.
Yeah, but it because it's only a half octave away from the bassoon, the timbre isn't as distinctive as it could be. Mm-hmm. But it's also, on the more practical side, you can buy these. These are available. They're probably not worth it unless you're crazy, but they are available. I would probably... Tenoroon is probably where I would go down to a 5.
You would go down to a 5 at Tenoroon?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because it is available.
It's available.
There's some practical utility, but it's more limited. You're more talking about nuances of timbre than you are, more notes.
Right.
Like the easiest way to get an instrument accepted in the orchestra is to take an existing family and provide a little bit more. So a little bit more oboe in the bottom, a little bit more clarinet in the bottom.
Yeah.
And the tenoroon struggles there a little bit.
Yeah, because it potentially could give you more.
Yeah. And it's also possible that if we imagine a world where people start taking the tenoroon, specifically the tenoroon in C, more seriously, we might imagine special vent keys specifically for being able to play up to like A5 or B flat 5, which would give you a healthy extension of the range.
Right.
What do you think?
I'm not
5.
I'm not quite as generous right now. If I were to tell a burgeoning composer what on a scale of 1 to 10, what are your chances of getting a tenoroon, I would almost go down to a 2.
Yeah, and if you look at it specifically through that lens of should you use it?
Yeah.
Right now.
Right.
I would agree.
As a viable instrument, I think it is more viable than some of the others. Like you said, you can buy it off the shelf. You and I have both bought them before.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now
we get into the hypotheticals. What's next?
Altoon. Where is...
It's on the desk right in front of you.
Oh, okay. We have too many oons.
That's the name of the next myth, Oonmoot.
No, Oonmoot forever.
Oonmoot too. Too many oons. So, alto bassoon, octave bassoon, altoon, altoids. I don't think this is a viable instrument as it exists right now.
It's so focused towards early instrument teaching, and the size difference is so great that there's a lot of compromises trying to square that circle of a smaller instrument that's also designed to be accessible for young bassoonists. So now, what about the potential of the size in general?
I think there is potential there. I don't think we have explored it yet.
Yeah. So, just completely hypothetical.
A complete hypothetical. So, what you would need with this instrument is a complete revision, soup to nuts. You would need new reed design, new vocal design, new tone hole, new bore design. You would need full or semi-full key work in order to...
Now instruments with full key work
Really?
are
Well,
mostly full key work.
Right. You would need...
Functional chromatic key work.
Yeah.
Not all the bells and whistles we're used to on bassoon with,
Right.
some of the extra trill keys and alternate keys.
You would need more octave vents. It would have to extend the range in such a way that it becomes a more viable option. I think if this instrument were to provide a 3-octave range from B flat to B flat, I think you could have a viable instrument there. Mm-hmm.
I still think there's more potential there for, if we want that high B flat, I think there's more potential to add vents to the C tenor.
I do too. I think you can get that eventually on the C tenor. This instrument you can't. There are no octave vents.
Yeah.
There is a tiny vent here in the vocal.
Oh, I didn't even notice that.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you had to give it a number between 1 to 10...
1.
Okay.
As is, it's a 1. Potential, you might go to 2.
Yeah. So I'm more interested in potential. I'd probably... So here there's going to be a rapid fall off for me because I know that as a bassoonist I'm supposed to vigorously defend the distinction between the bassoon and oboe instruments, but I'm actually a little bit on the other side of, I think the instruments have more in common, and when you get into this overlap range, high bassoons, I think that you start rapidly getting into the point where it's hard to know what a good altoon would sound like other than just an English horn.
Yeah.
Like, let's say you imagine that you have a bassoon or a altoon-sized reed to provide it a characteristic tone quality distinct from bassoon.
How close do you get to English horn?
Yeah. I'm not. That hasn't been answered, and I'm not certain that it would be distinctive enough to warrant. I think that the bassoon and oboe families occupy separate registers. I think maybe it wasn't intentional, but they've come to serve that well to complement one another. So I would probably also, call this a 2.
Yeah.
As far as potential is concerned. Now, I would love to be pleasantly surprised if someone does, as you were saying, go out of their way or go and design a...
I equate it to Bigfoot skeptics.
You'd love to meet Bigfoot.
Yes, they don't believe it's out there, but they would be very pleasantly surprised if it existed.
Yeah. Okay. So, next up...
Great bassoon.
Okay, I'll just set this here.
Okay. And watch me hit the fan. Oh, I missed it. No, I hit it. I think the Great Bassoon is all potential and no viability. As of right now, because we don't have a functioning instrument. That said, if we look at potential, I think it has more potential than the alto.
Okay.
Just as a separate tone color, a more flexible bass than the contrabassoon, in theory. But we're in a gray area because I don't have a working instrument yet. It's somewhat there, but...
Well, and from here on out, we don't have fully functional instruments.
Right.
So, I think we can take that, as read.
Mm-hmm. I mean, of course, it is my pet project.
You're allowed to have favoritism.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is. I think right now it is more viable than the alto. I don't know if it's as viable as the tenor, but I I think it could be equally as viable as the tenor.
Yeah. So, to me, sorry, did you want to
go
have
ahead.
a number?
2.
This is hard.
2.
Okay, well that's pretty harsh for your baby.
I mean, I'm a
But you're looking at it more from the lens of
right
as it is currently.
As it is currently, I would put it at a 2.
Okay, so to me, and you and I have talked about this. When you're talking about large ensembles, orchestras, concert band, I think that it's really difficult for these half-octave instruments to establish themselves unless they're the most extreme version. Like the English horn is used a lot because it's the most extreme, commonly available oboe. If we were to imagine another universe where the bass oboe became popular before the English horn, I don't think there would really be an English horn.
I don't either. I mean, there would be, but it wouldn't be as common.
Yeah, it would be more like the oboe d'amore. It's something some people have and they use for solo stuff, but it wouldn't show up that much in larger ensembles where there's less.
It's the alto clarinet problem.
Yeah, where
it fills a role. It is not a distinct enough role for orchestra use.
Yeah. So for me, I feel like the potential on the great bassoon is more of like the maybe not solo but chamber stuff scale where there's more room for a distinctive timbre.
I think if you are one of the composers who really kind of specializes in a lot more nuance to their tone color, and that's kind of where I lie on the spectrum. I think it has potential. If you are a bombastic composer who relies on a lot of percussion and sound effects and lots of brass, there's no real point to it.
But even in a large ensemble, even if you had let's say you had 4 bassoons and 4 clarinets and 4 horns playing, this kind of, thick, reedy chorale or something. I'm not sure that the great bassoon would be able to make its presence known, other than visually in that specific setting.
Yeah, I probably not unless you are dealing with notes that the bassoon can't play.
Yeah,
but then you've got contrabassoon.
Yeah, so the question would be, how often do you need to, if you have 4 bassoons, how often are you having to change the 3rd bassoon part to go up the octave because you really needed 2 contrabassoons? Like the bassoon and contrabassoon already have so much overlap.
Right. I would say there are times when that happens. It's not frequent, but it does happen.
Now, are you talking about times when the 3rd bassoon and contrabassoon would be playing separate parts? Or
more likely it'd be playing unisons.
Yeah, so when you have like 2 on top and then 2 on bottom.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I think the more potential of the great bassoon, like the great bass clarinet, which suffers from a similar issue where it's halfway in between 2 more popular instruments with very large ranges, or at least more common, is in building a distinctive solo timbre.
Yeah.
To use in more exposed settings, or like a great bassoon contrabassoon duet, or something like that. Rather than trying to go for large ensembles. And I think that there's a confusion out there with large ensembles, that large ensembles are where you get to throw everything you have at it.
No.
When really that's one of the less effective ways to use some of these more distinctive instruments.
Right. There's a reason that my symphonies 2 and 3, while being 2 of the largest symphonies ever written for wind band, are by and large extremely delicate pieces. They are some of those passages are extremely difficult due to the limited number of people playing.
Yeah. So Brendan, I wasn't so much disparaging the great bass clarinet, the contralto clarinet, whatever you want to call it, as much as pointing or suggesting that in a large ensemble, it really struggles with having its own voice. I mean, a lot of times, if a piece has a contralto, a great bass clarinet part, it's either it's the only contra part, and it's just as low as it can go, and then it jumps up the octave when it runs out of notes. Or there's both.
You very rarely see
contralto and contrabass parts, in which case the contralto just plays with whichever instrument it can, bass clarinets or contrabass.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in a clarinet choir, in maybe like a low clarinet quartet, there's a lot more potential for that sort of instrument.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would personally give the great bassoon maybe more like a 4. Because, once again, I'm thinking more of future potential, primarily based on smaller settings. Not so much. To me, the limiting factor is large ensembles.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to everyone's favorite. Well, next time we're gonna have to have Oonmoot bingo for how many times we hit that fan.
Or we just move out to the living room where it has a higher ceiling.
Okay, so next up we have the sopranoon. Once again, not a real instrument yet. I do think that there is physically space on this instrument for full chromatic key work that would give it like a little over 2 octaves in range. But I still think that's the same problem with the altoon of, I think that if we imagine a really mature, developed sopranoon sound, it's going to come awfully close to English horn or oboe.
I think it's a little wilder. But it's a little more pungent.
But is that because, I mean, I've heard oboists that I could describe as a little wilder and a little more pungent. But then they go to college, and that changes.
Sometimes.
And keep in mind, this is the first reed that I've literally ever made for this instrument, so maybe it's just this reed. I might actually be lower than you here. I'd probably put this at a 1. It would be a fun novelty to have for like bassoon ensemble.
Yeah.
But I really don't see it having much potential outside of that. However, I will say that having said that, I might actually use this in a recital. So,
I mean, I'm going to be right there with you. I think it's probably a 1.
Okay.
I mean, if I'm going to give the alto bassoon a 1, I probably need to give this a 1 too.
Yeah, it would be really weird if the bassoon family ended up going like bassoon, C tenorune, sopranoon.
Yeah. And skip the alto entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have similar feelings here.
It is curious. It's better than it has any right to be. Should it be used?
Leave this to the bassoonist to goof around with. Don't write for it.
Yeah. I have no plans right now to write for it. Can you imagine a chorus of just nothing but like 6 soprano bassoons?
I mean, I think I have 6 sopranoons in this house right now from all the revisions I've worked on. Okay, so next we got to set the floor here. The piccoloon. -1. You know, it's
a joke instrument.
Yeah.
It's
It's what happens when it's for the bassoon. It's for the bassoon ensemble that already has a sopranoon and is competing with another bassoon ensemble that has a sopranoon, and they got to say, we need one more novelty instrument to really distinguish us. And then you pull out this thing. So I didn't play this the other day because right now I have it plugged up so it can play the low B flat. Now, so that's 2 octaves above the bassoon, the same lowest note as an oboe, but the basic scale of the piccolo oboe. So key work would be a nightmare. And once again, best case scenario, you're probably getting something that sounds like an oboe.
Yeah. I mean, that low B flat does not sound dissimilar to an oboe's low B flat.
Yeah. Well, part of that is because on a low B flat on an oboe, you expect that wild and pungent sound.
But this is going to just take that wild and pungent sound all the way through the whole register.
Yeah. So I'm at -1. How about you?
I'm at a 0.
0. Okay. So you like the piccoloon more than me. That's what you're saying.
I mean.
Okay. And next up, we have this thing. Okay. I have to make the old man noises when I pick it up. That's the rule.
I-32.
Okay. Okay. So, this instrument. This is kind of a contradictory instrument. Because on the one hand, it feels a huge, a very distinctive niche.
Yeah.
Even in large ensembles. The challenge that we were talking about with the sopranoon, the tenorune, the great bassoon, the altoon doesn't really apply here because it can inarguably play things that not only know bassoon, not only know woodwind, but really no orchestral instrument, unless you include the organ, can do.
And even then, this surpasses almost every organ in existence by a couple notes.
Yeah, well, yeah. Not enough to really worry about, though.
Right.
So, in that regard, it does, I feel, have an edge on some of the other prototype instruments. Now, you could argue that there's a reason so few instruments play down there, because it's not musically useful enough to warrant the trouble of getting it. And I think that's definitely why low organ isn't used that often, because it's so complicated to get an organ in your large ensemble.
Yeah.
Like, you almost have to bring the large ensemble to the organ.
Yes.
Unless you're using a digital organ, and if you're using a digital organ, then just program a sample library to play G-3 or whatever, and it doesn't matter. You can make anything digitally.
Yeah. Whether or not the speakers can reproduce those sounds, however, is a different story.
Yeah, but you could probably get just monstrous sub-contrabass speakers hooked up to a synthesizer for less money than a sub-contrabass.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So there's that, where it does, like the contrabassoon, do something very unique in the large ensemble. Sorry, it's really hard for me to stay in frame and see Brett with this thing. On the other hand, even relative to the other prototype instruments, the in-development instruments, there are huge logistical obstacles that cannot be overlooked.
Yeah.
It is a awkward instrument. I wonder what note is actually going to happen. We had it, so if you haven't had the opportunity to do so, both Brett and I uploaded videos of us playing A-1 on the sub-contrabassoon. You can check that out on both of our channels. I don't know if the tone holes will still seal well enough. There's a combination of blue painter's tape and electrical tape on here, but we'll try for another A-1, see what happens.
On the first try.
So, it's because of that, it's really hard to judge. I would personally argue, under the standards I've been using, I would put it a little bit above the Great Bassoon by virtue of
the fact that it does something new.
It does something new, despite of the obstacles. What did I rate the Great Bassoon?
You put that as a 4, I think.
A 4?
I put it as a 2.
As a 2? I mean, I might be willing to go as high as 6. Now, the challenge here is, unlike the contrabassoon, I think that the contrabass register down to C1 is a register that almost all music can utilize.
Yes.
And in almost all orchestral music does utilize. Maybe they don't go all the way down to low C, but
they certainly go to E.
Yeah. So, whereas, you know, the sub-contrabass register, you could argue that there's a lot of music that, even if a sub-contrabassoon were available sitting on stage, a composer might just say, you know, I'm good.
Yeah. I see this as being used in more quiet settings, where
I think that's where it would be more effectively used.
Yes.
I'm not convinced that's where composers will try to use it, though.
I almost think this is being more of a psychological instrument, where
just intimidation. The brass section's getting too unruly, so you have to show up just to to demonstrate your power by completely blocking their ability to see anything.
Well, I mean that too, but I'm actually thinking more for a psychological effect in the music. It's something that you feel rather than hear. Particularly, you know, if you double the octave higher. Tell you what, you want to try doing it just an octave like B flat between this and the contrabassoon?
Sure.
To kind of...
Or actually, you know, before that, why don't we do the bassoon and the subcontrabassoon?
Okay. Yeah.
Get that 2-octave difference, because one thing that I found interesting when I was doing my digital mock-ups of the subcontrabassoon was using the subcontrabassoon multiple octaves below the instrument, so you get something for your ear to latch onto melody-wise, and then there's the subcontrabassoon on bottom. So why don't we go down in just octaves? So start on tenor B flat. We'll play tenor B flat and low B flat together. Let's try that again.
Okay.
All right, 1 octave lower.
That has potential there.
Yeah,
let's go
the 2-octave difference.
Yeah, the 2-octave difference. That's
now that's something. Sorry, I'm a little far from the screen. Aster, I think is the name.
Yeah.
Had an interesting idea of maybe doing on the bassoon kind of like a harmonic series. So hold out this low B flat, and then maybe you play low B flat, low D, low F. The harmonics of that. The stupid low. Actually, it could work on contra too.
Yeah.
Although. let's try that again. Now the difficulties here is that the subcontra is tending flat, and the that contrabassoon is definitely sharp on the low B flat. Okay, sorry. Now how about...
What's interesting is I can hear this instrument well enough that I can adjust my pitch to it.
Yeah.
Because I can hear when I'm in tune with the subcontra.
Well, it's kind of like people who aren't used to the contrabassoon. When they hear a contrabassoon for the first time, if they hear a low B flat or low C, they can't really tell you what note that is, but they can tune to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I can absolutely hear down on this B flat 0 that I'm way sharp compared to him.
So it's possible that with time you can develop some of that pitch perception ability that you develop on contrabassoon and gradually develop it on subcontrabassoon.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to do? Actually, grab the bassoon. So
okay.
We'll do some harmonics on this.
Okay.
Maybe a bit of free improv in B flat.
Oh, me improving is not a nice thing.
Yeah, at fortissimo, you get so many of those upper harmonics that it becomes a little more noisy, a little more percussive. So you get a better timbre with the softer sounds, which is kind of what we were talking about. We think there's more potential for the instrument in quiet, exposed passages. Mm-hmm. The problem is you just have to have a subcontrabassoonist that has practiced the instrument enough to be able to play some of those notes the first time. Because in a performance situation, it doesn't matter if you can get the note the third time. It's only the fourth time. Or sorry, only the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah, like see, that was the... Now, some of that might be leaking, but...
Yeah.
This is an important note, the low B flat -1, because this is kind of the central note, the last note of your Symphony No. 2.
Yeah.
Which includes an optional subcontrabassoon part. And actually, we absolutely have to record that separately now, so at least that last low B can be real.
Yeah, we're gonna definitely do that. That means I'm gonna have to remix the last track, but
well, you don't have to use it.
Oh no, I'm going to use it.
Okay. Yeah, probably flat, right?
Yeah, I have a hard time bringing it down. Yeah.
And the really funny thing is, I don't think you can see it here, but some of these tone holes, they look like little speaker cones when you play those notes. They're vibrating. Whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, so I think we've talked about viability.
Yeah.
The last thing to talk about is day 3 of Oonmoot. We do have a little bit planned for tomorrow, and it's kind of a special closing ceremony. And I think it'll definitely be on my channel, and I'll try to get the track or the file to Brett so that we can upload it on both of our channels. So it's not going to be a full day of streaming. It's going to be kind of an event, but I think you'll enjoy it nonetheless.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Are there any important questions?
Are there any not important questions?
Aster saying, now I kind of want to compose a piece entirely based around the harmonic series of a subcontra note. We didn't rate the purple oons. How dare us? I mean, not an instrument, right?
No,
not applicable. Like,
no.
You can't play a scale on it, so like as non-viable as the piccoloon is, you can play it.
Yeah.
In fact, on the event for tomorrow, there is piccoloon played by my wife, making her her bassoon debut because she agreed to it. She's a scientist, but she also plays flute in the at the for fun level, and she agreed to it, thinking that I was saying piccolo instead of piccoloon.
This is why I like the 2-word monikers instead of the one.
Yeah, because there's so many situations where you're going to be running into ambiguity of piccoloon versus piccolo.
Right, and which we ran into last night.
Well, I think we found the one situation. Okay. I'm going to put this up, Brett, if you want to check chat and see if there's anything
all right,
left, and then we'll wrap up.
I think I'd actually think the subcontra might be useful in some movie scores, especially horror scores. Hearing extremely low drones, intense moments would be extremely creepy.
Well, the important thing about film scores is you can mic it.
Yeah.
And you can mix it in separately, so you can have it exactly as loud as you want it to be. So I would agree there.
Yeah.
The only problem is the only person who has a subcontra bassoon lives like 20 hours away from California.
But you're not that far from the recording studios in Nashville, where they do a lot of stuff too. If you watch Cyril's Clarinet Family, it's the equivalent of the fake little keychain-looking clarinet.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Did you ever consider creating the Great Bassoon in F sharp? I mean, the original one was in F sharp, and this one, with certain reasons, is flat enough to nearly be in F sharp.
Okay, so Daniel brings up a point about the piccoloon is calling it the sopraninoon. I just find that, well, first of all, for the other reasons we talked about, I think the highest instrument should be something involving piccolo, and I think sopraninoon is a really awkward word to say.
Yeah, no, sopranoon is a hard word to say. I mean,
anyway, so sorry, I interrupted you.
I butchered sopranoon several times yesterday.
I interrupted you about the splitting the difference, right?
Yeah.
Just if we can't decide between a great bassoon in written in F or written in G, you could build one in C sharp so that it would be in B so that it would be written in F sharp.
Yeah.
Which would be almost
hated by everyone.
Yeah.
Hated by everyone.
Okay, anything else? Play the opening of Alpine Symphony. No. Good.
I like the opening of Alpine Symphony. I actually use that as a test for reeds and vocals.
Well, the difficulty is the
not the long B flat on contra.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought he was talking about.
No, the opening. You know the opening?
Yeah. Well, the really long descending phrase in bassoon.
Mm-hmm.
Brendan, unfortunately, I've already taken off the electrical tape, so I can't play low B flat anymore on the subcontra. Okay, so Jaden says great bassoon is perfect third bassoon replacement. So, and I think that's what Brett had in mind. It's just you really have to weigh how often the third bassoon really needs to play lower than bassoon versus how much less common the instrument is and how much less accessible it is. I think the vast majority, at least right now, most bassoonists would much rather play a passage on bassoon, even if it includes some soft low notes that are awkward, rather than learning a new instrument, developing reeds for a new instrument. There's a large learning curve to bring the great bassoon, the subcontra bassoon, the tenorune up to the performance standards that you could use it alongside the bassoon and the contrabassoon and have these benefits be realized. Okay. I'm going to go grab something real quick.
Okay. I think I know what you're grabbing. I'm going to sit here awkwardly because that's what I do.
So, someone asked about subcontra bassoon keys, and I actually have cut all the keys out. I can't. If I turn it upright, they'll all spill out of their separate compartments. Right now, they're all organized by what key they're for. But all of the subcontra bassoon keywork components are made. I just need to solder them together. Although now I'm probably going to do some intonation testing. If there's tone holds that have to be moved entirely, that might mean I need to modify some of these keys, and it'd be easier to do that now rather than later. Okay, let's see. I think unless you have... yes. So those of you in chat right now, Jared De Leon is working on subcontra bass clarinets. So Jared, feel free to drop your YouTube channel in the chat.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and big shout out to Jared because he's done all the CAD modeling for the Great Bassoon.
Yep.
And so the Great Bassoon is very much a collaborative effort between Jared and myself.
And so Jared is saying that he's done some preliminary work on kind of those subcontra bass clarinets and is working on refining the design. So Brendan, the issue of nomenclature on the lower than contrabass clarinets is sort of up to the person who actually builds one. LeBlanc called theirs octo contra alto and octo contra bass, but then they never sold them, right. And now you can't even hear them. Except,
right, yeah. Arguably, though, the term octo contrabass, would be relegated to just the two LeBlanc instruments. And subcontrabass would be a more universal term for anybody who produces one.
Now, I would personally consider subcontrabass kind of like the generic term for this. I'd probably still call any clarinet an octave below, or any clarinet below contrabass a subcontrabass.
Yes, I would too.
But honestly, it's kind of like what is it? A comet. You discover the comet, you get to name it.
Yeah.
You build a low clarinet, you get to name it. If you want to call it octo contrabass, then make one.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we need to
I think we.
Jaden, we are not getting into that spiel today, because I've said enough unpopular things today. So I think we need to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Once again, stay tuned for at least my channel, hopefully both channels, tomorrow for the closing ceremonies of Oonmoot 2021. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, absolutely. We would kind of like to make this kind of a regular thing every year, where we just get expand it just beyond, two guys in a, in a room, make it more kind of, an actual gathering of other bassoonists.
Yeah. Well, we'll hold off on that for a little while.
Yeah.
Okay. Have a good day. I was clicking this thing right in.